Hello, everybody, and good morning to you. You are very welcome to this webinar brought to you by Enterprise Ireland in partnership with BDO. What a terribly wet and windy day it is across the island of Ireland right now. I'm here in Cork, where there certainly has been a sense that we had a real storm overnight, and everybody is making sure that flooding doesn't happen over the next little while. But fingers crossed, we'll get through this. We've gotten through worse crises, let's put it that way, over the last 12 months. This is a webinar on rules of origin, and it is organised by Enterprise Ireland's Brexit unit in partnership with BDO. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the background and the implications of rules of origin on Irish businesses. Why has that arisen? Well, of course, it has arisen because of the change in trading environment since Britain left the European Union on January 1st, 2021. We've been talking about it a lot. It is now here. It is now a reality, and regrettably, it is having a very real impact on a lot of the businesses that are looking to trade both to the UK and through the UK. So the discussion we're going to have today covers issues such as Irish exporters and importers, what they face in terms of implications of movement of EU and third country originated goods post-Brexit. We have got a wonderful speaker from BDO. She's in their Customs and International Trade Services Department, Carol Lynch, who we will talk to in a little while. She's going to provide an overview and an explanation of the issues and the implications, and we're going to discuss, most importantly, some solutions that can help Irish businesses resolve the current differences, and there are many. You're not alone in facing these challenges. Countries right across the European Union are having this, but it's being particularly felt here because of our previous interdependence on Britain, both for transport, logistics, and as a source for both sales and inward investment. We're going to come to all of that, but it gives me great pleasure, first of all, to introduce the Minister of State with responsibility for trade promotion, digital and company regulation, Robert Troy TD, who is with us this morning on the line. Minister, I'll invite you to turn your camera and your microphone on at this point so we can say good morning to you.
Good morning. Can you see and hear me okay?
We can see and hear you very well. As I said, it's wet here in Cork. I'm presuming it's a little bit like that where you are as well.
It is indeed. It is indeed. So thanks, Jonathan, for the introduction, and good morning to everybody who has joined us this morning. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to welcome you to today's events and to thank Enterprise Ireland and the local Enterprise Office for facilitating this Rules of Origin webinar. Rules of Origin is quite complex, and given the changes that has come about since the 1st of January, I believe this webinar to be useful and both timely. As I said, since the 1st of January, we are dealing with a fundamentally changed trading relationship between the UK and the EU. This is defined in the EU-UK Trade Cooperation Agreement, which outlines the conditions under which UK goods can benefit from zero tariff rate when imported into Ireland or indeed anywhere into the European Union. These conditions stipulate that the technical issues, such as a preferential rule of origins, now need to be considered in the new relationship with the UK. The rules determine in which country a product was sourced or made, its economic nationality, so to speak. This status helps to ensure that customs authorities recognise that goods originating in the UK or EU originating goods qualify for zero tariff rate as agreed in the Trade Cooperation Agreement. I'd also like to thank Carol Lynch from BDO Customs and International Trade Services for joining us today. She is here to share her expertise in relation to the rules of origin topic, and will offer practical advice to Irish businesses. And I would encourage people to ask any questions that they have of Carol this morning. As I said, at the outset, I appreciate that rules of origin requirements are complex and are difficult, as well as the other customs requirements that and checks that have come about since the 1st of January. This is a new concept for many Irish businesses who in the past traded mainly or indeed even exclusively with the UK. And while I in no way wish to underestimate the challenges that these new requirements bring, especially for small business. And that's why government stands ready to assist with these challenges. And this webinar this morning on such a complex area is a case of point. It's an example how we're here to help and assist. The 24/7 helpline that has been set up, revenue that has gone live since the end of December and continues to operate, additional facilities or additional officials, I should say, who are working at the ports in 24/7 that are there to help and assist and to walk people through any new difficulties or challenges that they face in importing and exporting their goods. So this webinar today is going to provide a clear overview of this complex topic and the implications for Irish importers and exporters. And while a lot of us have spoken about, and rightly so, the need to diversify into new markets, to look into mainland Europe for exports, the fact of the matter is that the UK has been and it remains Irish largest single trading partner. In fact, in 2019, Enterprise Ireland clients, their exports to the UK was the highest ever and represented 31% of total exports. So this is a testament to the importance of the UK market, and it's also a testament to the resilience of our Irish businesses through uncertain times. So I encourage Irish businesses to make the most of the advice and the supports available to ensure that we minimise supply chain disruptions and any other barriers that inhibit the smooth flow of their goods to and from UK. Today's webinar, we'll hear more from Giles O'Neill in Enterprise, who will outline in greater detail Enterprise Ireland supports available to companies preparing for their business for Brexit. Of particular note is the Ready for Customs grant, for which applicants, eligible applicants can still apply up until the 31st of March this year, or until the €20 million fund has been dispersed. That is a grant, for those of you who don't know, of €9,000, and it's available for recruitment or redeployment of an employee into a dedicated customs role. I have to say I'm surprised that the fund hasn't expired by this, and the slower take up than we would have anticipated. So if there are businesses out there who do need that expert advice and assistance in relation to getting ready for customs, there is a good grant of €9,000 available, and I would encourage you to avail of that. In addition, there's the €5,000 Evolve Strategic Planning Grant, and that will assist companies to adapt their approach to the market, to secure and grow their sales, explore approaches to supply chains, and to prepare for changes in certification and regulatory environments, which is coming in on the 1st of April, as you will be well aware. So I would encourage everybody that's on today to fully engage with Enterprise Ireland, to fully engage with your local enterprise office, to get the necessary supports that are there to help you manage your business in a post-Brexit environment. But thank you again for joining this morning's webinar. Thank you for what your businesses do for the economy of Ireland, and wish you luck in the challenging weeks and months ahead.
Minister, thank you so much for joining us this morning and giving us your time. You're obviously a very busy man. Given your brief, we'll let you go and turn your camera and your microphone off. But thank you so much for joining us this morning. Lots of advice and encouragement, which is what people really need to hear at this time. Minister, excuse me, Minister Robert Troy, thank you very much for joining us. So, what is on our agenda here today, folks? Well, we're going to talk about a number of different things. We're going to ask the very basic question, and as the idiot in the room, I'll be asking it: what is rules of origin, and how can it have implications for business? We're going to talk about the requirements for exporters. We're going to talk about the requirements for importers. We're going to talk about keeping the necessary files and paperwork to comply with those rules. We're going to give you some examples of how they've impacted businesses in the real world. So in other words, moving from the theory to the reality on January 1st, 2021. And this is very important. You heard the minister say there's an opportunity for questions. Your questions are going to be what drives this debate. So over on the right-hand side of the screen, I'm going to go that side, you are going to see a little panel with a drop down, and you can ask a question that's going to come through to me that I can ask of our experts, both Carol and Giles, as they join us later on. And then we're going to hear, as you heard from Giles, about the supports that are available both from Enterprise Ireland, if you are a bigger company, or if you're a smaller company, you're probably still dealing with the local enterprise office who provide an invaluable service and support right around the country. Those supports are there. Please use them. That's what they're for. But of course, I would not be great on my own explaining rules of origin. We need an expert for that. So it gives me great pleasure to ask Carol Lynch to turn on her camera there. Good morning to you, Carol. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well. Now we obviously know each other from the circus, the Brexit circus.
The
Brexit. And it was almost, we felt like we were talking around in circles for so long because it was a theory. It was a theory. It is very much now a reality, isn't it?
It is, and it's amazing, like what you say, the difference between theory and reality is quite different. Like you can go through as many of the theoretical issues that were likely to impact in Brexit, what was likely to happen in terms of imports and exports, how to prepare for it. But once 1 January hit, it's very different. It's a lot more time pressured. It's a lot more stressful. So, you know, putting that theory into practice, certainly, I think for all of us, and certainly that first 2 weeks in January were pretty stressful. I know on New Year's Eve, I was all Brexit, nothing else.
Yeah, exactly. Not much champagne.
No, wouldn't have been good.
Yeah, let's talk about the basis of this. What is rules of origin? Because people will ask this question, and I think we'll move on to the next slide. What are we actually dealing with here?
Okay, so the UK and the EU agreed a trade agreement, thanks be to God, on 24th of December. And what that meant was that goods which originate in either the EU or the UK can enter the other territory at a 0% customs duties. So if they hadn't agreed that trade agreement, we would have been paying what everybody was referring to as the WTO rates. So your 6%, your 12%, you know, whatever the customs duty rate was for the import of your product. Because they agreed the trade agreement, it meant that if you can prove, let's say you're an importer into Ireland, if you can prove that the goods that you're importing qualify as originating in the UK. And when we talk about originating, essentially what we mean is, are they manufactured there? I mean, everybody would we went into the legalities of it, I'd be shot for saying that, but it's essentially, and you know, at a basic level, where were your products manufactured? Where do they ultimately become a product in many ways? So if you manufacture something in the UK and you can prove it was manufactured there, and I'm going to go into the very specific rules around that, but at a high level, as a rule of thumb, if they were manufactured in the UK, then they can be imported into Ireland with a 0% customs duty, and vice versa. If you manufacture something in Ireland, then you can import your goods into the EU at a 0% customs duty. So it's massive for customs duty savings and incredibly important. And if you don't follow the rules, and if you don't put the right paperwork together, you don't get the benefit.
Well, and again, to give it a little bit of context, and this is what kind of blew my mind when we had our conversations pre-Brexit, it was that we just got used to, over a period of 40 years, things just moved. There was no paperwork really. It just moved from one side to the other. Everybody was delighted. Yes, there is a customs duty rate of 0%, but there's a heck of a lot of red tape. And if the red tape isn't all dealt with, then your products get stuck.
And that's the problem. There was a little bit of confusion last year, even when the trade agreement was being discussed, and I think possibly even still to some extent this year. The trade agreement allows for the 0% customs duty, so that gives you your customs duty benefit, but that's completely separate, and kind of good to separate it in your mind between the customs duty rate you're paying to the authorities and the compliance and the paperwork. So regardless of whether you're paying 0% or you're paying 20%, it doesn't matter. You still have to do your import declarations, you still have to do your export declarations, you still have to have your health certs. So all the rules surrounding compliance and paperwork, they don't change, and they were never going to change as a result of the trade agreement. The trade agreement was purely going to be, in a customs term, focused on what customs duty rate you would pay. So you do need to have the two strands in your head. Okay. What is my compliance obligations and what's my rate?
Let's talk about the context for the trade agreement, which is the next slide.
So the context obviously was, first of all, Brexit, unfortunately. So Brexit, as I said, meant that the UK is a non-EU country, was going to be a non-EU country fully with effect from 1st of January. So we had the transition period last year to prepare for that. And the import-export paperwork, as I said, was going to be introduced on the 1st of January. The trade agreement then was to allow the 0% customs duty, because that was going to be a second knock-on hit for all European and UK companies. So the EU has a trade agreement with a number of countries. So it'll have a trade agreement with, for example, Norway, with Canada, and you would have heard of those kind of bandied around in the news last year as to whether it's going to be like the Ukraine agreement, is it going to be like the Norway, is it going to be like the Canada agreement? Not the Australia agreement, because we don't actually have an Australia agreement. So it follows the lines of a free trade agreement. Now, it isn't as comprehensive in some ways as other trade agreements. It's very comprehensive insofar as it covers all products, which is very good, but there are limitations in how it's applied, and that has caused some confusion. So the benefit, like the Canada agreement has, I think, 92% coverage, whereas the UK-EU trade agreement has 100% coverage. So everything's in there, but it is quite, there are restrictions in how that is applied.
And let's talk about then, this is where you have to explain things to me because I'm lost. MFN versus TCA. So tell me about these rates and what do they mean?
Yeah, so what I was saying earlier was, if there was no trade agreement, and if we look at the slide here, if there was no trade agreement, this is an example of the type of duty rates you pay here under the MFN rate or the WTO rate. So this is probably some of the worst examples, but still, it's just for example purposes. If you're importing plastic bags, for example, and you didn't have a trade agreement, you'd pay 6.5%. With the trade agreement, if you can prove that they originated in the UK, they're 0%. So for a lot of Irish companies, we'd import a lot of plastic packaging. That would have been 6.5% without the trade agreement. It's 0% with the trade agreement. If you're importing cheese, it's 188.2 euros per 100 kilograms without the trade agreement, or 0% with the trade agreement. So the rates are, they're going from an average chemicals would be about 6.5%, your clothing would be around 12%, then you're up into the food and agri products at 20% up. So you can see how they kind of mount up.
Yeah, it does. So let's put that into real world then. What does this mean for businesses that are on the ground?
So if let's say you are manufacturing let's say you're making a food product and you import plastic packaging to go around it, which would be fairly typical, and you send it back to the UK. If there was no trade agreement, you could be paying 20-30% on top of that, because you're going to be paying on the food product going into the UK. You'd also be paying the 6.5% on the packaging coming into Ireland. So your costs would mount up. Now, there are customs duty suspension procedures, which I won't go into here. This is really kind of just giving the bigger picture. But essentially, for an Irish company, if there's no trade agreement, it means when you import, it's more costly. You are paying an additional 6, 10, 12% on top of the cost of the goods that you're buying, which you would not have paid before. So everything goes up.
But does that mean then that we're in a good, in theory, having a trade agreement is a good thing? So that means that we can continue to do what we were doing and import and export. But that's oversimplifying it, because we're about to talk about the reasons why it gets quite complicated quite quickly. Yeah. So let's talk about exporters. So in other words, the requirements on exporters, first of all, how have they changed?
Okay, so first of all, I think the first point, as you said, is trade agreement is a really good thing. It would be horrendous to start the new year without the trade agreement. But with the trade agreement comes obligations. So what we need to understand as exporters and importers is, what do we need to do to make sure we obtain that 0% rate? So if you're an exporter, so you're an Irish exporter, you're selling goods into the UK, what is it you need to do? So the first thing, and I'm going to go through these in a little bit of detail, so I probably will get into some customs technology, but it is quite confusing for people looking at this for the first time, who've never had to be involved in customs, who've never had to do.
But it just happened. They didn't have to worry about it, so therefore it was not a thing. Whereas now it is a thing. Yes, there is an agreement, but you have to jump through the hoops that you're about to.
Through the hoops. And you had a week in real terms to really kind of get your head around this. for the trade agreement purposes. So the first thing you need to do, and these are the 6 steps, and that just even going out of this presentation, I think if everybody even put this on their desktop and made sure they went through this process before exporting goods, it would be important. So the first thing, confirm the tariff heading of the product you're shipping. So when you are importing or exporting, every product has a customs tariff heading. Now you'll be used to that by this stage because you won't have been able to import or export without applying a tariff heading. But I'll briefly show you how to get that. So confirm the tariff heading of the product you're shipping. Once you've got the tariff heading, you need to check what the rule of origin for that heading is. Every single product has a rule of origin, and you need to check what that is. It could be a requirement to add 50% added value. It could be a requirement for what's called a change of tariff heading. It could be a requirement to do a specific operation, but you need to know what that operation is. You need to know what that rule is. You can't simply say, I qualify as originating. If you buy goods from other European suppliers and you're using that as part of your value declaration, you need to get a supplier's declaration of origin from them. And that's basically them telling you that their goods originate. You need to undergo substantial processing. So as I said, the manufacturing test, are you undergoing a substantial amount of manufacturing? You need to register with revenue in what's called the REX database. And then you'll get a REX authorization number. And then you print that authorization number on your invoice or your other commercial document that describes the goods, along with a very specific origin statement. So you have these 6 steps to go through, and you must go through them.
There's a couple of rabbit holes there, which I think we're going to dive down using the examples that we're going to give in just a minute, because that goes from being something incredibly simple to becoming quite complicated. And then you've got multiple elements. Like, no good realistically is unique. It probably contains component parts from around the place, and that's where the problems arise. So because you knew that I didn't understand this property, you're giving me a couple of very easy to understand examples, which is very kind of you, Cara. You clearly remembered my performance in previous Brexit webinars. So the first example you're going to talk about is a kitchen wooden cabinet. I understand at least what that is.
Well, yeah, it's living in Cavan, we make a lot of kitchen cabinets, so I thought this would be useful for everybody. So let's take the example of a kitchen manufacturer making nice wooden kitchen units, and you're exporting them to the UK. And I totally made this up, but you import, say, wood from the US, you'd import fittings from Italy, and you do all your manufacturing in Ireland. So we've got our imports and we've got our EU supplies, and we're doing our manufacturing here. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to check, well, what's the tariff heading of that kitchen unit that I'm selling? And to do that, I've put the link here. I can't go on to the internet, so I've kind of just done it. And here's what I did earlier. The link is there for tariff consultation.
Well, we can share that on later. It's the easiest thing.
Yeah. And then you get your tariff heading, which in this case is 9403.40 for wooden furniture. So you've identified, pardon?
It just rolls off the tongue.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know too many of these off by heart. So you get your tariff heading for your furniture, your wooden cabinet. Now it's 9403.40, and it can either be fitted 10 or other than fitted 90. So we know what our tariff code is, and that's our first step. So now we go on to the next step, step 2. Next slide. And the EU has produce this database, which is extremely valuable for checking the rule of origin. So the purpose of this database is for you to be able to check what the origin rule is for your heading. So again, the link will be in the presentation slides, and it's called the ROSA database. And as you can see here, you put your product name up here, or your HS code in the top left-hand corner, your country of origin, which will be Ireland, your country of destination, which will be UK, and you hit search. But also, I would encourage everybody to just discover access to markets. There's a little video there the EU has produced. So I would spend the 10 or 15 minutes kind of just listening to that video, because it'll talk you through this database.
Okay, so that's like a Google for ROSA codes then, is it, if you were to put it in simple terms? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so that's because where else am I going to get? Where am I going to get the rule? I can go to the trade agreement, but you might not want to go to that. So this makes it a little easier. So if we go on to the next slide. So here I've put in my 9403.40 for my kitchens, and I put in my country of origin, Ireland. I've put in my country of destination, UK, and I've hit search. So that should come up in animation there. Just hit the next slide, hopefully. comes up, or I'll have to talk it through.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Well, so what this says is then it's produced from either, so this is your rule of origin. So you're looking to see, have I produced that kitchen cabinet from non-originating materials of any heading except that of the product? So what that means is, yeah, what that means is that you cannot import anything under 9403. And in this case, we haven't, because if you look here on the left-hand side, our imported wooden planks are tariff heading 4407. So we meet that rule of origin. And that's the idea of that, is to say, if you change tariff headings, then it's a kind of a given that you've done substantial manufacturing. So what you're doing there is you're saying, what have I imported? Look at the tariff code of what I've imported and see, is it a different code to the product that I'm manufacturing? And in this case, we can see our wooden planks are 4407, our kitchen cabinet is 9403. We've changed tariff heading, we qualify. You've got two options here. So it could be either that one, or your other option is that you have what's called a 50% added value. So production in which the value of all the non-originating material used does not exceed 50% of the ex-works price. And what they're saying there is, if you sell, I've put in here again on the left-hand side, let's say you sell your kitchen at 10,000, you can't import more than 5,000 worth of product. So 50% added value. So both going back to the concept of, have you done sufficient manufacturing in Europe to qualify? So again, I've said here, made it up completely, but the planks are 3,000, they're under the 50%, so I've qualified. So I could use either of these two rules, and I know I've qualified as originating.
Okay, which is good, but then you have to worry about the declarations of origin from suppliers as well. That's the next thing we have to worry about, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So if you are including, if you are including in your value that no more than 50% has been imported from outside the EU, but you're buying from European suppliers, how do you know that those European suppliers haven't just imported the goods themselves? So you need to get proof from them that their goods are EU originated. So we bought our fittings in this case from Italy, but how do we know that our distributor in Italy or a manufacturer in Italy didn't just import the fittings? So our Italian fitter, our Italian manufacturer needs to give us a supplier's declaration of origin, and they need to go through the same process to confirm that their product qualifies as originating. Now, there is a derogation for for 2021. So the EU and the UK, recognising that this agreement was only reached on the 24th of December, have said that you have until the end of the year to get those declarations. So normally you couldn't issue an origin declaration without having the supplier's declarations on file, but you've got till the end of the year to pull those together. You do have to pull them together, but you have.
So you still have to do it. Yeah, you still have to do it.
You still have to do it. But yeah,
never.
Yeah. But so do go back to your, start the process rolling and make sure that you're getting those declarations. And I've given here on the right-hand side an example of a supplier's declaration. And again, it's just saying that we confirm that our goods qualify as originating, so that you can use that figure in your calculation.
What are the things that people will struggle to get their head around is what exactly is substantial when it comes to substantial processing? And that's the next step here, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So the list of products, so a very specific list of what is not substantial. So if you're on this list, you don't qualify. So preserving operations, drying, freezing, etc., don't qualify. Breaking up or assembly of packages. Now, this is a particular problem, which I will come to later, but any kind of goods which are just unpacked and repacked don't qualify. Ironing of textiles, painting, husking, sieving. So anything that you're not doing a substantial amount of work on and you don't have any special skills or special machinery, they're not considered to be qualifying as originating. And I suppose that's particularly important for Irish companies is simple assembly. If you just engage in, so you just import a number of, I know this is one of the questions that came in before the call, for the presentation as well. If you import a number of parts and you just assemble them, put them together, that won't qualify as originating. So you'll need to be very careful in looking at your assembly operations to determine, are they simple or are they not? Now, that seems like that's quite subjective, so it doesn't make life easy. But you go back to one of your examples, one of your ways of doing that would be you'll use your change tariff heading rule or use your added value rule. But that would probably be the most complicated one for companies to decide, am I engaged in simple assembly or is it more than simple assembly, if you're on the kind of the cusp of it?
REX is the name of a dog, as far as I'm concerned, but it does appear to be a registration system as well. So what is a REX registration?
So once you've gone through this whole process, you then need to apply to Revenue for REX registration, which is a registered exporter registration. So if you're exporting goods and the value is over €6,000, you must be registered with the EU REX database. And when you register, you will get a registration number, and you must quote that number on your statement. So when you're issuing your origin statement, you must quote your registration REX number on the invoice. For UK suppliers, it's a little easier in that they, at the moment, only need to quote their GB EORI number. So European exporters must be registered at REX, must quote their REX number. GB exporters quote their EORI number. But you do need to make that application to Revenue. And I won't go through the full details of the ROS and how you go through it and everything, but it does I've included there the details.
So your EORI number is of use to you, but not in this scenario. You need a REX registration as well. So
you need to register.
Having just EORI, and we know how difficult it was to get everyone to sign up to that alone.
Yeah.
You need this as well. This is an additional requirement. At the very end of that, he said, joking, that means we have an origin statement, which we can then use to say we can export, and it's not going to attract any extra cost.
Yeah, so this is your statement, and this is the statement. Just copy it straight onto your declaration. This is the statement that needs to be reduced. So the period, it can be a long-term declaration, or it can be just covering the specific export. The export of these products covered by this document, exporter reference number, and that's your REX registration, declares that, except where otherwise indicated, the products are preferential origin, and you put your name and the date. So if you issue an invoice, and some products qualify and some products don't, you simply asterisk the ones that don't qualify. So it's, as it says there, declares that except where otherwise clearly indicated. So whatever's simple for you to use, but have some way of saying, well, these ones qualify and these ones don't.
So that's complicated. Is it any easier for importers? So that's the export side. You have to go through all of those different hoops to export your product to make sure you attract the 0% rate. If you're importing, is it different? I mean, does that all have to be done in advance then before you get to import? So it's incumbent on your supplier.
Yes. So on the importing side, what you want, you have two options. Either your supplier goes through that full process, puts the export declaration together and the origin declaration, and you simply rely on that and you put it on your import declaration, which is, in my view, the only option. The other option is that you, based on your own knowledge, declare that those goods qualify as originating. But if you do that and you're going to declare based on your knowledge that goods qualify as originating, you have to go through that full process. You can't simply say, well, they seem to be manufactured in the UK, so therefore I guess they do. You have to have gone through the process and have all the information. So unless you're dealing with a related party, that's almost impossible. So you really want to push that.
You cannot assume that they have done it, can you? I mean, do you have to assume that they've done it?
So what the exporter will do is they'll produce that statement on their invoice with their GB EORI, and they'll declare that those goods qualify as originating. So if they've done that, you are assuming that they have gone through the process. Unfortunately, if ultimately there is an audit, and let's say that invoice was completed incorrectly, the importer is liable, which is extremely unfair.
So in other words, if they make a bags of it, it's the importer
you're
who's
liable.
And okay, well, you have to make sure that they get it right then, and that origin statement is very important. That brings us to keeping of records. Which again is something we didn't have to worry about before, but we do have to maintain now because there is specific requirement on you to maintain records relating to both import and export, is there?
Yes, exactly. So for 3 years, and standard would be in customs 3 years plus the year of import. So for a minimum of 3 years after the date of import, the importer must keep all the records. If the claim is based on so either the invoice declaration from the exporter or your own records if you're doing the importer's knowledge option. The exporter must keep it for 4 years. So you will have an audit. Let's put it this way: not this year, but next year there will be audits, both on the GB side and the ROI side. And this paperwork needs to be available to Revenue to complete those audits.
This is a huge volume of paperwork that's suddenly been generated. I mean, there are inevitably going to be mistakes made if people get used to it. is there going to be allowance made for the fact that this is still technically a transition period after the transition period, or do you have to have it right from now?
No, you have to have it right from the beginning. If there's minor discrepancies on the paperwork, that's fine. But the essentials, if you claim origin status and you don't qualify, you owe the duties.
Okay. I'm importing from Jonathan Healy UK. Lovely guys. They've been looking after these things for years. And I imported. And then it turns out afterwards that Jonathan Healy UK had been skimping on some of the statement of origin. And as a result, I had been found out by a revenue audit, which brings us on to our next slide, liability. Whose fault is it? I mean, I want to blame Jonathan Healy UK, despite our loyal relationship that's gone back years. They've screwed me over here. Who's liable?
For revenue purposes, the importer is liable. So you, unfortunately, the Irish importer is liable. So I would say to everybody to talk with their lawyers and look at their contracts and make sure to include an indemnification that says if you are supplied with incorrect, and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know the wording to put on this, but I would talk to your relevant people. But essentially, what you want to say is if you are supplied with incorrect information, that you will, that the supplier will ultimately be liable. Revenue will go to you first. There's nothing you can do about that.
Yeah, you're going to be. Well, they can't do anything about the guy in the UK. They can do something.
Exactly.
Obviously, they're not going to chase him when they can chase you instead. So
exactly.
Again, just an added layer of complexity that's bolted on. I mean, it just shows you the rabbit hole you go down, Carol. It seems easy on the face of it that, hey, it's 0%, we can trade freely. But there's so many steps to get through as we get to that. Yep. So let's dive into the examples, because there's some specific examples. And if you thought, hey, it was kind of complicated to know, here we go. You've got various different examples here. So we've wholly produced, change of tariff heading, added value percent, distribution centres, and Northern Ireland, which is one that's still causing complications. So let's dive into that first one. Wholly obtained, and there's a lovely picture of a calf here, so nothing could possibly go wrong.
Again, I live in Cavan, I just took a photograph outside the window. So wholly obtained is essentially what it says in the tin. Something that's grown in wheat is grown in the ground, plants are grown, animals are born and raised here. You produce milk from an Irish cow, it's wholly produced. So really nothing else is in it. It's as you see it, it's produced here, no added value, or not, sorry, no added value, no added substances. It is literally the flour that's grown, the vegetables that are grown, the calf that's raised, that type of thing.
Yeah, straightforward enough. It's 100% Irish. You could nearly put a sticker on it, and that means that the origin is here. There's no confusing. Now, next one, change of tariff heading. So that's what you hinted at a little bit earlier on, and this is where it gets a little bit squidgy.
Yeah, and you would have seen this in the papers over the last couple of weeks in terms of bread. So with change of tariff heading, you need to be able to show that as I said, all the products that you imported are at a different tariff heading than the product that you manufacture. So you need to look at the tariff heading of the product that you're manufacturing. In this case, I've given bread as an example under 1905. And then I need to look at all the raw materials, and I need to make sure that I'm not importing anything under 1905. So you've got to do the two analysis. You've got to check what's the tariff heading of the product that I'm selling, which you need to do anyway. But you also need to look at your bill of materials and say, everything I've imported from outside the EU, what tariff heading is that at? And it needs to be at a different tariff heading. So change of tariff heading literally being the rule.
Yeah, that is the rule. The next one is value added. And again, this is a matter of interpretation for some people, but the rules are actually quite clear on it.
Quite simple, again, simply saying, okay, and the typical one is 45-50%. So in this case for the bicycle, it's 45%. So what we're saying is, what's the sales price? So we sell the bicycle at €200. No more than 45% of that €200 can consist of imported parts. So again, relatively simple once you get the bill of material. What am I selling the product at? What am I buying in from outside the EU or the UK? And it can be no more than whatever the limit is. So in this case, the 45%. So you're looking at, again, we've just given random examples, a handle from the UK, tires, pedals, etc., and worked it through. These are kind of more takeaways so people can get an example. You can work through the example of how change tariff heading and how value added works. But essentially, it's what am I selling it at, and then what's my cutoff? What's the limit at which I can actually import?
And people will be familiar with that because that was a thing before, value added,
Yeah,
and whether or not you could stick a made in Ireland or made in France sticker on it. So it's not
exactly.
dissimilar to that, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's not. And it's like, when you get, most of the rules require one or the other. It's either change the tariff heading or value added. So while it looks quite complicated when you go into it in the first place, they really tend to split between one of those two. And those two are not, they are relatively simple once you get your head around them. It's either, you're looking at your bill of materials, you're looking at what you import, you're looking at what you sell, and you're saying, either do they all change tariff heading or have I added the relevant number, the relevant value?
Yeah, this is where most of the conversation, the next point, this is where most of the conversation has been around in the last one. And there is the much maligned Percy pig.
Percy.
It's poor old Percy.
Percy.
German pig, raised in Britain and sent to Ireland. And I think that's where we have a little bit of a challenge here. Retailers and distribution centres. It's almost as if they hadn't thought this one through. And there's a whole load of problems with this. And if you're involved in food manufacturing or you're involved in distribution of anything that has to sit in a distribution center before it's moved on or sold on, that's when it gets really complicated.
This one is a huge problem. So if you go back to what I was saying, one of the rules is that you must do substantial processing in the country. You can't do a simple assembly. You can't do unpacking and repacking. So if we look at Irish, in particular, this impacts on Irish companies, we import a lot of our products from the UK, not only UK manufactured, but also from UK distribution centres. So you're not going to import a full container from, let's say, a German manufacturer. What's going to happen is the German manufacturer sends a container over to the UK, they go into a distribution centre, they get unloaded, and a couple of pallets come over to Ireland. Yeah. Our problem here is once they've left the EU, they're no longer European originating, and they cannot be UK origin because they haven't undergone any manufacturing in the UK. So they become stateless, essentially. And so our Percy pig had this problem. Percy goes over to the UK in a container. A couple of pallets were to be sent on to Ireland for sale here. But because there was no manufacturing taking place in the UK, they were no longer qualifying for the trade agreement, and the full customs duty hit. So for Irish companies, in retail, this happens a lot for the retailers, for the food companies, for not so much maybe in manufacturing, but most, a lot in retail and food. We're buying from the distribution centre, but as soon as those European goods go into the UK and get released for what's called free circulation, so they get released in the UK, then they can't come back into Ireland with the origin relief. So you're going to have to apply.
So you're going to have to either move those goods directly from the continent to here, bypassing the UK, or else you're going to have to apply the tariff if they're coming in through the UK. So I mean, there is no easy solution here, is there?
No, there's three options. So either, as you say, bypass the UK, but then you've got to import the full container. A lot of people just don't want, don't have the ability to do that. Your second option is transit. So we just kind of send over transit through the UK. But again, it's a full load that you're importing. Thirdly, you can bring them into the UK and put them in a bonded warehouse in the UK, so they remain under customs control, haven't been released for free circulation, and then come over to Ireland, and so they've retained their origin. So certainly go back to your use case supplier and ask that.
There's your cost starting to go up the whole time. So every word is an extra bit of cost. Let's talk about Northern Ireland, because the Northern Ireland Protocol, excuse me, I'm really glad you're not in the room because you think I've got COVID, but I promise I don't. Excuse me. Incorporating Northern Ireland goods. The protocol is in place that we can trade freely north and south, and they can trade relatively freely east and west, but there's a border down the Irish Sea. So if you're dealing with the north, it's grand. You just keep going as you're going. And they really, despite what the politicians might tell you, have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, so for Irish companies, again, this makes life very easy. If you're buying from the north, selling to the north, no different, no change. You're not worried. It's all as is. If you're buying Northern Ireland product and manufacturing and then selling those goods into the UK, that's all good as well, because it's the UK EU trade agreement. So, but we've got our block. What you need to be careful of is where you buy Northern Ireland products, manufacture in Ireland, and sell to, for example, Canada. Now you've gone to the so the EU trade agreements do not include Northern Ireland. The only one that's included is the UK trade agreement. So if we're buying and manufacturing and selling in the UK and using our Northern Ireland product, that's fine. That's part of our origin calculation. But if you're selling them outside of that to a country with which the EU has a trade agreement, Northern Ireland is part of the UK politically, so they're not part of that trade agreement network.
So there's another pitfall that you might fall into. Right, okay, so there are all the challenges. So let's move on to the next slide, which is probably the important one. What do they need to do now? So what do exporters, Irish importers and exporters, do right now if they haven't mastered this yet, or if a lot of this is still, even on the 23rd of February, coming as a bit of a shock, that there's so much that has to be done? What do they do now, Carol?
Okay, so first step, establish the tariff heading of your product. So you know you have to have that anyway for your customs paperwork. So you need that regardless. This isn't just for origin. So what are you exporting? What's the tariff code? Check the origin rule. Go onto the ROSA database, check what the rule of origin is for your product. Maintain the files. Check. So once you've checked the rule, then put it down. For, as with all other purposes, do you meet the rules? How have you got all the paperwork? Do you comply? Keep those records for 3 to 4 years, depending on whether you're the exporter or the importer. And I think very simply, at a very simple level, if you're an importer, ask your supplier, are they manufacturing in the UK? Now, this is not a technical question. It's not that it's in the rules anywhere, but I'm just saying, I asked one of from the former customs officers, who he just made a very good, sensible point. Ask where are they manufacturing? You'll get an indication, is it being manufactured in the UK or is it being distributed from the UK? And check your contracts. Make sure you have indemnifications.
Yeah, because those could become very important if the revenue finds something in the paperwork that they don't like the look of. Let's move to questions and answers, because obviously there are lots of them that are coming. So I'm just going to give you a sample of them now, and I know we'll try and get through as many as we can. And if not, I'm sure that we'll be able to do that offline afterwards. But one viewer, good morning, says, we have received a few deliveries from the UK in January. We have no importation document other than an invoice from the supplier of the goods. I've requested more information from the suppliers, but they have said it's nothing to do with them. What should I do? So again, this is the dichotomy. We are talking non-stop about this in this country. Across the water, the conversation has been very different, and almost is coming as a surprise to them that there might be a responsibility. Yeah. So that company now is storing up a problem, isn't it?
Well, the first thing it needs to do is check the contract terms. Are you buying from the supplier on what's called delivered duty paid basis, DDP, or basically anything other than DDP? On a delivered duty paid basis, DDP, the supplier is responsible for the export paperwork from the UK and the import paperwork into Ireland. If you're buying on any terms other than that, you're responsible. Certainly for the import paperwork and potentially for the export if you're buying ex works. So your first step, what's the contract? What are the terms of trade? What have you agreed to? And if you are the importer, then you need to rectify that situation pretty instantly, because goods have been imported without paperwork. That's not allowed.
What do you, but I mean, again, if you go, like they've tried to do this, they've gone to them and said, look, you need to tell us about the rules of origin here. And if they persist in saying, well, it's not our problem, and you can't convince them that it is their problem.
First of all, check who's responsible. And let's say worst case scenario, you're responsible. Then next thing you need to do is you need to make a declaration to customs for those goods, and you need to pay the appropriate taxes and account for them. And so if you contact a clearance agent, customs clearance agent, or your local customs officer, but probably easier to go through a clearance agent. Or if you have a good relationship to your local revenue officer, contact them. But you do need to tighten that up. You cannot have goods in the country that haven't been declared.
I would imagine a great way to sort this is to say to that supplier, guess what? We're no longer going to take supply off you. We're going to go with someone who can comply with the regulation. And you'd be surprised, I'd imagine, how quickly a lot of suppliers will change their tune. Like the enemy here is complacency. We have been complacent because it's been easy, and now it is hard. So we have to take that into account. Now, this is, Carol, I love testing you. I mean, I get that the wealth of knowledge inside that head and cabin is fascinating. So here's a good one. We import Chinese origin goods into Ireland, which have been shipped into England from our supplier in the Netherlands. So Chinese origin into Ireland, shipped into England from the supplier in the Netherlands. Is there a way to avoid paying the Chinese origin duty fees with the goods?
Yeah. So your Chinese origin products, you should bring them, if you bring them into Ireland, you're paying customs duty, and then you're paying customs duty again going into the GB. because they don't qualify probably as European originating. So you need to put in place what's called an inward processing procedure, where you suspend your customs duty on arrival in Ireland and you write it off then on the basis that it's exported out of the EU to GB. So you'll have no customs duty on arrival in Ireland. You will be still paying it in GB on the basis that they don't qualify as originating, or if they don't qualify as originating, but you will have you won't get the double duty hit.
Okay, here's another one for you. Will there be any changes to the rules of origin in the coming months on the 1st of April or later in the year? So again, you see, there's an awful lot of confusion here because we've heard talk of the derogation
yes.
in Northern Ireland that's kicked everything out by 3 months, but that's different.
Yeah.
That's relating to Northern Ireland. It's not related to what you're doing if you are exporting to the UK.
Exactly. So again, the two things are separate: the trade agreement and the rules of origin, and the paperwork. The trade agreement is very unlikely to change. It was, I think, difficult enough to achieve it in the first place. They're not really going to reopen sections. It'll be very limited sections that will be reopened. So let's assume just generally no. What's happening in the changes that are happening in April and July in the UK are the introduction of more health checks on food of animal origin and plant-based products in April, and then on 1 July, full import declaration. So there's a transitional procedure in place in the UK at the moment, where if you're a UK established entity, you don't need to lodge customs import paperwork until July. You do have to lodge it, it's retrospective, it's not to get away with it, but you have that temporary derogation. On 1 July that ends and it's full paperwork. That's nothing to do with the origin rules.
Okay, so that, again, that's separate. So look, all this has done is this has added layers and layers and layers of complication that previously there hadn't been. And the question I would have always asked you when we were on the earlier roadshows was, how much of this would be necessary if Britain stayed in the European Union? The answer, of course, still is.
Well, if they stayed in the European Union, none. You know, if Britain had left, we'd be happy out. There'd be no import and export declarations required, no paperwork required.
One more quick one, and again, this is a technical one. Are there particular rules to consider if supplying multiple parts as part of a kit of a system? So in other words, there's a big bundle of stuff inside it that might have come from a load of different locations. How do you deal with something like that?
Okay, so for that one, you need to check the origin of each of the component parts. There is a very specific rule, which I can't completely remember off the top of my head, but it's if I can email that answer out. If no more than 15%, I think, is non-originating, it qualifies. But you look at if the kit is classified as one product, you're then looking at the component parts. I think it's the 15%, but I can send out the answer on that one.
Okay, very good. Well, Carol, I can understand why you didn't celebrate on New Year's Eve based on the amount of work that has been generated for you and your colleagues in BDO. Look, thank you for talking us through it. I know the presentation is going to be made available to people afterwards, and I know you're going to be able to provide answers to some of those questions as well that have come in. But for now, Carol Lynch of BDO, thank you so much for joining us this morning from the fine county of Cavan. We need to turn off your camera and your microphone there now, and we'll invite our next speaker to turn on his camera. Giles O'Neill is the manager for Enterprise Ireland's Brexit unit. He's been watching that as well. Giles, good morning to you. It is complicated, isn't it?
It is. And look, thank you, Carol, for trying to bring that to life. And Jonathan, I hope that, you know, based on the people that are listening in this morning, that the content and particularly the questions and answers, we designed this webinar and the listeners helped us design it. So one of the things we asked was, what do you really need to know? And look, hopefully the content that Carol has shared with us this morning has shed more light onto it. But look, we're not going to leave it there, okay? And there's lots of additional support out there. So if this has heightened the awareness within your business that you need to do a little bit more, I'd like just to talk about a few areas of support that we can offer. The Minister introduced the Evolve Strategic Planning Grant at the start. I'm not going to go into that detail again. He also mentioned the Ready for Customs grant, open to anybody that wants to take somebody on to help them do this. And just to say that there's a full range of supports from the 31 local enterprise offices. There's advice, there's Brexit mentors, there's coaches, there's training, and there's financial support. But Jonathan, you alluded to this earlier yourself. I've spoken to a number of businesses in the first weeks of the year, and they really are using all the help that they can get. revenue site, the Minister mentioned it at the start, 24/7 call centres, revenue.ie. If you're in the food business, DAFM, they also have a call centre 24/7. The ports, the Irish Exporters Association, Chambers Ireland, there's incredible support from the freight logistics, customs clearance area, the Irish International Freight Association, the FTAI, another freight association, and the Irish Road Haulers Association. Lots of information, lots of expertise. They've been doing this for years. Ask them. And then there's your own local networks. Everyone will know somebody that has been trading with third countries. Now is the time not to sort of go back into yourselves. Now is the time to reach out and to ask for help from experienced people to help you get through this. And finally, we'll circulate the recording of this. You mentioned it earlier, and the slides, and we'll go through the feedback that you gave us at the start, and the feedback and the questions and answers you've given us throughout the webinar this morning. And we may take the opportunity, and looking at the various different topics that are being raised, to take another hour out on another specific topic, if you think that would be of value. And finally, and it is on another topic, the UK also are going to be applying new certification and regulation rules. So the traditional CE marking that everybody will be familiar with, come the 1st of January next year, there will be a UK CA marking requirement. And the enterprise team in London are organising a webinar on this on Thursday. And there's great take up, but if that's something that you would like more information on, it's another thing that you've got to do. We'll pop it into the chat function here as a link to that. It's on at 4 o'clock on this Thursday.
Okay, so again, the message you want people to take away from this is don't deal with this on your own. That whatever problems you are facing right now, others will face similar problems. It might not be the exact problem, but there will be someone who can talk you through the solution. And I suppose just finally, Giles, if I can ask you one last question. This isn't going to get any less complex because Brexit has created the complexity. But to finish on a hopeful note, as we get used to it more, is it going to get a little easier? Because we are dealing with something new, and you know when it's new, it can be complicated. As time goes on, there will be streamlining, there will be a flow that will go to these things and people will get through it. For those who are struggling right now to get their heads around this, I suppose, can we give them that little bit of confidence that time, the great healer, will make this a little easier as we move along?
Absolutely. A colleague of mine says, Brexit wasn't an event, it's a process. And as you work through that process, it will become normal trading relationship. And that's the new trading relationship that we have to have with the UK. And as a note of light, we ran a big webinar in London on the 11th of February. We did a piece of research before that, and 85% of the people that took part in that, and of which there were 500 or 600 businesses, still were looking optimistically at growth within the UK and beyond for 2021 and 2022. So that's a high note. Irish business has a habit of working through things. It's hard at the moment. Let's work through it. And if you need any help, you just need to ask.
Okay, Giles O'Neill of the Brexit Unit Enterprise Ireland. We haven't even mentioned COVID once. It's been that kind of webinar. So we'll do one crisis at a time and all that. Giles, thank you so much to you and all the team for the hard work that you're doing in the Brexit Unit of Enterprise Ireland. And that's it, folks. You have on the screen there the support. But if you need any information at all, this is the website you need to go to, prepareforbrexit.com. This isn't going to be solved overnight. It isn't going to be solved in 2 weeks. It is the new normal, if we can call it that. Companies will still trade with the UK. Nothing has really changed dealing with our counterparts in Europe, but we will get to some stage where this will become a little bit easier. So if you have learned something from today, share this webinar on when the recording becomes available. Others may benefit from Carol's experience and understand more the responsibilities that they have and the reality that this has changed very much from how we used to do it, but not in a way that we can't do it. So thank you all so much for joining us this morning, wherever you are. I can report that the rain has stopped here in Cork. Fingers crossed we'll send that clearance up the country as the day goes on. But on behalf of everybody at Enterprise Ireland, thank you for your attendance. Good luck and good morning.